All right, so who's got that dog that barks and barks and barks at the window? Is that yours? Well, you know what? That used to be mine. And I'm here to share with you a couple of tips to basically change that behavior. So, up to this point, what have you tried? You know, uh, give me a give me a note at the bottom. Let me know what you have tried, but it's not working. Have you tried like spray bottles? Have you tried yelling at them? So I'm here to share a couple of tips that I have used and shared with my other pet parents, and they work. But you got to do the work with your dog. So who am I? My name is Linda Kwan, and I am the owner and trainer of Wow Bow Wow. We specialize in working with pet parents with dogs, that need some help with behavior modification. So, and even puppies, new puppies. So, what we do is help the pet parents raise and train a well mannered and well adjusted dog. So, to help your dog not get so frantic at the window, screaming at whatever they're screaming at as it goes by. So, here are my tips. First one is when you're not there to work with them and train with them, don't give them access to the window, okay? Whether you close the curtains, put a film up, minimizing visual will help a lot. Even preventing access, if you have a pen that you can put in front of it to prevent them from getting to the window, is even better. Because what you don't want to do is keep letting them do the behavior over and over again. All that does is just make it a bad habit that's going to continue. So that's number one. That's pretty drastic, but you got to start there. Okay. Tip number two. So I don't want you to say they bark at everything. Identify what they bark at. Is it people going by? Is it like motorcycles going by? Is it a dog going by? They don't necessarily bark at everything, right? So identify what are their triggers at the window. So like I mentioned in tip number one, you know, prevent them from getting to the window when you're not with them training, okay? Now, for tip number two, like I mentioned, making sure you identify what the triggers are. But then now tip number three is once you identify what the triggers are and you start to work with them to help them change their emotional status about that thing. In the beginning, when they started barking at it, most likely it was because they may be worried about it. So it was kind of alert barking. Maybe later on it's a frustration barking, but now it's become a habit every time they see that trigger, whether it's a person or a dog or that mailman or whatever else. So when you are not in training mode, make sure you prevent them from getting to the window. Then when you identify what the triggers are, because you know your dog, you know what makes them bark at the window. So the third tip is basically, like I mentioned, getting them desensitized to that specific trigger. So how do you do that? So there's a couple of games you can play with them as you're training them at the window as the triggers are going by. And one of them is called Look at That. So basically, Look at That is the concept of they look at the trigger, and at that moment, you're trying to change their perception of it, right? From a negative to a positive, or even neutral is even best. So, your reward, you associate that, seeing that trigger with a reward, whether it's food or loving. Most dogs, really do well with food. So give them food when they see that object, when they see that trigger, when you see that trigger going by. And then, as it passes, then you can stop and wait for the trigger to come back again. Now, this is during your training sessions, right? So the next step of the look at that game is if they're doing really well with taking the treats as that trigger is going by, the second step is then next you are waiting to see if they will look at you when they see that trigger the next time. And this may not happen the first time you're training them at the window for sure, okay? But that's the progression that you want to do. Now, in the comments, tell me if you've done anything like this before. If you haven't, is this a new concept for you? Like desensitizing them to a trigger to change their mind about the trigger to where that basically it'd be like not important to them, a non-event. And with this look at that game, basically, they may start coming back to you when they see that trigger. The behavior that you change to is them looking back at you. Isn't that much more ideal than them screaming, and screaming at that trigger until it passes? So if this tip was helpful, let me know in the comments below. And so in a couple of days, I want you to practice this and, come back here and let me know if it's working for you. If it's not, let me know that too. I can share another game with you all, maybe next Tuesday, to help with the desensitizing to the trigger. All right. Thank you for joining me for my Training Tip Tuesday. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next Tuesday.